If you think this story is wild, wait till you hear what really goes on behind these walls. Hit that subscribe, drop a comment and stay close, because nothing about this story stays clean for long. The sirens began just before midnight. At first, it came from the outer fence line, a metallic wail rolling through the Central Valley heat, but within seconds it bled into every corner of Central California Women's Facility. Inmates froze mid-whisper, officers jolted upright, and another sleepless night shattered into chaos. Deep inside Housing Unit C, a fight had gone bad. CCWF, built for 2,000 women but packed with over 3,500, had always been volatile. The air smelled of sweat, disinfectant and despair. But that night, August 14, 2018, the violence would expose a network that had already rewritten the prison's hidden laws. When the floodlights snapped on, the yard glowed in harsh white. Blood streaked the concrete near the laundry dock. 2 bodies lay there, one motionless, one barely breathing. It took minutes to confirm who they were: Angela Ice Ramos, the most feared inmate in Chowchilla, and Janine Mama J. Holloway, a former Oakland activist serving life without parole. Ramos ruled contraband. Mama J. built an empire of education. They were opposites, power and principle, but both knew how to survive where survival was the only currency. Now they were sprawled side by side, one dying, the other bleeding into silence. Lieutenant Karen Vasquez arrived 20 minutes later. After 22 years inside, little shocked her, but this was different. Ramos's throat was cut with precision, not rage. Mama J's wrists were bound with torn bedsheets. The cameras outside that hallway? Dark for 7 minutes. To most it looked like another inmate feud. But Vasquez saw details others ignored: the angles of the wounds, the silence of witnesses and the missing footage. Within 48 hours she realized the murder wasn't random. It was a message. Central California Women's Facility was a city within walls, its own politics, economy and hierarchy. At the top sat Ice Ramos, East LA born, tattoos crawling up her neck like warnings. At 23 she was convicted for double homicide. Within months she controlled the commissary trade, smuggling phones and running scams that reached all the way to Los Angeles. In another wing lived Mama J, 61, gray-haired, once famous for protesting police brutality. Convicted of aiding a fatal robbery, she turned her block into a classroom, teaching women to read and file appeals. Guards tolerated her because peace followed her. 2 women, 2 empires, one built on fear, one on faith. Between them lay the truth of that night. Vasquez began digging. When she requested disciplinary files, one was missing. Case 14-2217, a complaint from an inmate named Lydia Torres alleging officers were extorting prisoners for money and favors. The file had vanished. Torres had been quietly transferred. Now 2 women linked to that complaint were dead or near death. Interviews hinted that Ramos and Holloway were planning something. Ramos had cut off her suppliers. Mama J had gathered signatures for a petition exposing guard corruption. Different tactics, same goal. Both had challenged the system that fed off them, and someone silenced them. 3 days later, officers found a half-burned notebook in Ramos's cell. The pages listed inmate names, transfer dates, and officers' initials. At the bottom, one line: Mama J knows. Trust her until the lights go out. Vasquez brought it to her supervisor. He told her to drop it. The case was closed. That's when she realized the rot reached far beyond inmates. Mama J regained consciousness 2 days later. She refused to speak to guards but asked for Vasquez. Under harsh fluorescent light, she whispered that Ramos had found evidence of money being siphoned from the prison's rehab budget into fake contracts. The proof was on a flash drive hidden in the laundry. Before she could hand it over, Ramos had been taken for questioning. When she returned, she was shaken and silent. By morning, Mama J was moved to protective custody. Officially for safety. Unofficially, isolation. Rumors spread fast. Whispers said Ramos hadn't been killed by an inmate, but by someone wearing officer boots. Others said the flash drive still existed. The yard grew thick with paranoia. One inmate, Deja Keller, a young coder busted for fraud, used a contraband phone disguised as a radio. She hacked into the facility's Wi-Fi and sent an encrypted message: "Find Lydia Torres. Tell her the walls are cracking." The next night, fire erupted in dorm E3. When officers put it out, words were scrawled on the wall in soot: "Silence is a sentence." Under the doorway, a torn notebook page bore one name: Lieutenant Vasquez. Fear ran both ways now. Inmates saw Vasquez as their only chance at truth. Her colleagues saw her as a threat. A week later she was called to a closed-door meeting, ordered to surrender her notes. When she refused, her car tires were slashed. The evidence logs disappeared overnight. Vasquez decided to find the flash drive herself. Late one night, she entered the laundry building, the hum of dryers masking her steps. Behind a loose panel, her flashlight caught a glint, a small key labeled B114. Block B had been sealed since 2016, a forgotten isolation wing. If Ramos hid something there, it was untouched. Vasquez waited until shift change, then crossed the dark yard toward the abandoned block. The corridor smelled of rust and bleach. Every door was welded shut except one, cell 114. She slid the key, pushed the door, and swept her light across the walls. Scratched words read, "Trust her until the lights go out." Behind a rusted air vent, she found a flash drive sealed in plastic. Her hands trembled, it was the proof. Then came footsteps. Heavy. Close. She turned. The beam caught a figure in correctional blues, badge unmarked. The voice was calm. "You shouldn't have come here." The flashlight hit the floor. Darkness swallowed the cell. The storm that swept through Central California Women's Facility the night before had calmed, but the air inside still felt heavy. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly over the corridor leading to the segregation wing, their hum the only sound breaking the silence. Lieutenant Vasquez walked slowly, her boots echoing against the concrete, her mind racing through everything she had seen the night before. Angela Ramos lying motionless in the yard, the fire, and Mama J's cryptic words in the infirmary. It started in the chapel. Inside her office, the scent of burnt paper still lingered from the recovered notebook. The investigation board on the wall had begun to fill up. Names, shift schedules, fragments of witness statements. But the deeper Vasquez went, the more she realized how much had been hidden beneath the surface of CCWF's daily routines. She began with the surveillance logs. The prison's camera system was old, unreliable, half the angles from the night of the fight were covered in static. But at 11:43 p.m., one camera caught something strange, a shadow slipping out of the laundry room door minutes before the alarms went off. The figure wasn't an inmate. The uniform was wrong, dark, tactical, with no badge. Whoever it was, they moved like they belonged there. Vasquez leaned closer to the screen. Then she froze. The figure turned slightly before disappearing down a hallway, and the profile looked familiar. It was Officer Delgado, one of her own team. Delgado had been working in security for nearly 7 years, a quiet man with no record of misconduct. He was the last person she'd suspect of tampering with evidence or sneaking through the prison at night. But the flash drive Vasquez found behind the vent in dorm E3 began to feel heavier in her pocket. Someone wanted her to find it, and maybe, to connect Delgado to whatever had gone wrong. She shut the blinds and inserted the drive into her computer. It took a moment for the screen to respond, then a folder appeared, "Do not open." Her heartbeat quickened. Inside were dozens of files. Incident reports, guard shift rotations, medical logs. And one folder titled Angel. Opening it revealed photos, grainy, time-stamped images from inside the facility. The first few showed regular surveillance captures of inmates in the yard. But the next ones were different. Images of bruised women, taken in what looked like a maintenance room, under harsh white light. In every photo, the same woman appeared in the background, her arms crossed. Angela Ramos. Vasquez's stomach turned. Ramos wasn't just an inmate, she'd been part of something much bigger. A hidden network operating inside CCWF, smuggling, extorting, and silencing those who got in their way. But if Ramos was involved, then Mama J's warning meant more than it seemed. It started in the chapel. The chapel at CCWF was one of the few neutral grounds, a place where rival groups could sit in the same room without drawing blood. It was where contraband often changed hands, where guards looked the other way for a favor or two. Vasquez decided that's where she would start. That afternoon she met with Warden Keene. The warden's office was decorated with commendations and framed photos of politicians who had visited the facility, but the woman behind the desk looked more worn than proud. "You think one of my officers is involved?" Keene asked, narrowing her eyes. "I'm saying there's something off," Vasquez replied. "Delgado's on camera where he shouldn't be. And this," she held up the drive, "didn't find its way into a vent by accident." The warden leaned back, studying her. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Vasquez. Delgado's connected. His brother works for the department. You don't want to start rumors you can't back up." Vasquez knew the meaning beneath her words. The department had a way of burying things, cases, complaints, even people. She had seen it before. That night, as the cell blocks went quiet, she slipped into the chapel. The air was still, the faint scent of candle wax and dust lingering from the last service. She scanned the room, her flashlight sweeping across pews and the old pulpit. Then she noticed a patch of wall near the confessional, newly repainted, slightly brighter than the rest. She touched the surface. The plaster felt soft. Behind it, something was hidden. Using her utility knife, she cut a small square through the drywall until her light hit a glint of metal. It was a box taped shut. Inside were stacks of photographs, old inmate letters, and a thin journal labeled Property of S.H. The first page stopped her cold. They promised us silence. We gave them everything. The handwriting belonged to Sandra Holloway, Mama J. Every entry detailed a hidden network between guards and certain inmates, how medical supplies, drugs, and even phone access were traded for loyalty. Ramos had been the enforcer, but someone above her controlled the flow. Vasquez read until her hands began to shake. One line stood out, underlined 3 times. The day I tried to walk away, they buried her in the laundry. Who was her? The file never said. But there were dates, 2017, 2018, 2019, all linked to incidents ruled as suicides. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Vasquez turned off her flashlight, heart pounding. Through the cracked chapel door, she saw a beam of light. Someone was searching the hall. The voice that followed made her blood run cold. Lieutenant Vasquez, it called softly. You shouldn't be here. It was Delgado. He stepped into the doorway, calm, expression unreadable. You've gone too far, he said, his flashlight aimed directly at her chest. I found the files, Vasquez replied, steadying her voice. I know about Holloway Ramos, all of it. Delgado sighed. Then you know why this can't leave the walls. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak, another voice echoed from behind him. Put it down, Delgado. Mama J stood in the corridor, weak but standing, a medical robe hanging loosely from her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp, fierce. I told you it would come out, she said. For a moment, none of them moved. The sound of distant keys and radio chatter filled the air. Then Delgado stepped back slowly, eyes flicking between them. You don't understand, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But it already had. As Vasquez helped Mama J back toward the infirmary, alarms began to sound again, distant, muffled at first, then spreading across the prison. Somewhere in the main yard, lights flickered and screams broke out. Whatever was buried in those files was surfacing, and the system that had protected it for years was about to crack wide open. Vasquez looked back toward the chapel one last time, the journal still in her hand. It started here, she said quietly. But it's not ending here. And as the sirens wailed into the cold blue night, she finally understood why they called this place the cage that never sleeps. The alarms didn't stop for hours. Blue emergency lights pulsed through the walls of Central California Women's Facility like a heartbeat gone wild. Vasquez had barely caught her breath when the yard went into lockdown. The warden's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, firm, rehearsed, and calm, but everyone inside knew what that tone meant. Something big had broken loose. By morning, the entire prison was on edge. Inmates were confined to their cells, meals delivered on trays that smelled of bleach. Correctional officers moved in pairs, tension written across their faces. No one spoke about what happened the night before, but the whispers traveled faster than the guards could silence them. Word was spreading that someone had leaked files to the press, files from inside the lieutenant's office. Vasquez hadn't slept. She sat in the staff break room, the journal still in her hands, its pages dog-eared and stained. Every name, every date inside it was a crack in the system she had served for 15 years. Mama J's writings painted a picture of a prison run by deals, debts, and silent threats. The lines between officers and inmates had blurred long ago. Just after dawn, a young officer named Prieto knocked on her door. Ma'am, he said softly, closing it behind him. They're saying Delgado's gone. Vasquez looked up sharply. Gone? His car's still in the lot. His radio's off. He never clocked out. She exhaled slowly. Delgado wasn't the kind to run, not unless he knew what was coming. She walked to the warden's office, where chaos reigned. Keene was on the phone with Sacramento, her voice clipped in tight. 2 investigators from the Department of Corrections sat waiting, their briefcases unopened, faces unreadable. On the table was a printout of a headline. Whistleblower exposes corruption at California Women's Facility. Someone had leaked the files. The same files from the flash drive. When Keene hung up, her glare landed on Vasquez. You started this, she said coldly. I exposed this, Vasquez corrected. There's a difference. The warden leaned forward. You don't understand the storm you've created. The department's calling it an internal breach. They'll bury every name they have to, including yours. Vasquez held her ground. Then they can try. But I'm not letting them bury the truth again. That afternoon, the prison's rhythm shifted. Guards whispered in corners. Phones were confiscated. Inmates stared from behind bars as investigators walked through the halls, notebooks in hand. Somewhere in the East Wing, Mama J had been moved under medical isolation, but Vasquez suspected it was for her protection. Later that night, as the lockdown lifted, Vasquez went to check on the chapel again. The broken wall had been patched, but someone had left something on the pulpit, a small folded note with her name written in neat handwriting. Inside it were 3 words, check the laundry. The laundry block at CCWF was always hot, loud, and suffocating. But tonight it was empty, machines silent, the air thick with detergent and tension. Vasquez turned on her flashlight. Piles of clean uniforms lined the tables, and the faint hum of a vent echoed through the pipes. Then she saw it, fresh cement near the back wall. A patch darker than the rest. She crouched down, running her hand over the surface. Someone had sealed something recently. The memory of Mama J's line came back. The day I tried to walk away, they buried her in the laundry. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a crowbar from a nearby tool rack. She chipped away at the patch until the concrete cracked open, releasing a smell of damp and rust. Inside the hollow space, wrapped in layers of plastic, was a small box. Inside the box was a lanyard, Delgado's ID badge, and a phone. The screen was shattered, but one video file remained intact. Vasquez pressed play. The footage was shaky, grainy, clearly recorded in secret. Delgado's voice came through first, whispering, "This isn't what I signed up for. They said it was just surveillance. But they're using us. They're using everyone." The camera tilted toward a table where 3 men in suits were talking quietly, the word, division, visible on a document in front of them. They called it containment, Delgado continued. They control what stories get out, who gets silenced. The clip ended abruptly with a loud thud. Vasquez stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Delgado hadn't run, he'd been silenced. Before she could react, she heard the metal door slam shut behind her. The light from her flashlight flickered across the walls, and there stood one of the investigators from earlier, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said quietly. "Where's Delgado?" Vasquez demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You want to make this right? Then you stay quiet. You walk away. That's how you survive this place." Vasquez clenched her jaw. "That's not why I'm here." The man sighed, then turned toward the door. "Then you won't last long." He left, locking the door behind him. Vasquez's flashlight dimmed. She sat down beside the open wall, clutching the phone, surrounded by the hum of distant machinery. She realized this wasn't just about the women behind bars, it was about everyone trapped in a system designed to keep them there. By dawn, officers found her in the laundry block, still awake, still holding the journal. She had already made copies of the files and hidden them outside the facility through a contact in Sacramento. Whatever the department tried to bury, she had made sure it would surface. In the yard, the sun broke through the fog, the prison bathed in a cold, washed-out blue. Inmates looked out through the bars as news vans gathered on the highway outside. Something had shifted. The silence that had ruled CCWF for years was finally cracking. Mama J watched from her infirmary window, a faint smile crossing her face. "They wanted silence," she murmured. "But they forgot, walls remember everything." As Vasquez stepped outside for the first time in days, the air felt different. Heavy but clean. The truth was out, and so were the ghosts. And somewhere beyond those walls, the world was about to learn what really happens behind the bars of America's toughest women's prison. The morning light broke cold and indifferent over San Quentin's women's unit. It was 6 a.m. when the first alarms went off, not for a riot, not for an escape, but something far quieter, far more dangerous. The warden's office was surrounded. Internal affairs officers walked in, their badges glinting like blades in the sterile blue light. Whispers followed them down every corridor. The women knew something had shifted. The old order, the silence that had ruled for years, was cracking open. Riley was still in solitary when they came for her. She sat on her cot, hands cuffed, a dull ache behind her eyes from nights without sleep. The door creaked open, flooding her with light. A voice called her name, one she hadn't heard in months, Detective Alvarez. "You ready to talk now?" he said, tone softer this time, like he wasn't sure if she'd bite back or break down. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked past him, at the two officers behind, one holding a file with her name scrawled across it. Inside were photographs, letters, and a sealed affidavit. Alvarez placed it on the table once they reached the interview room. "You weren't wrong," he said finally. "Everything you told us, about the bribes, the abuse, the false reports, it's real. We have proof now." Riley's lips trembled. For a second, she looked like the street-hardened woman she once was, someone who'd learned to survive through silence. Then something in her cracked. "You think I did this for me?" she asked. "You think I wanted to be a hero? I just wanted someone to listen before another one of us disappeared." The file on the table was full of names, officers, contractors, even medical staff who'd falsified death certificates. The story was bigger than anyone outside could have imagined. The corruption wasn't just inside the women's wing. It spread through the very system that claimed to uphold justice. The news broke by afternoon. CNN, BBC, and every major outlet ran with the headline, "Whistleblower exposes decade of abuse inside one of America's most secure prisons." Reporters gathered outside San Quentin, their microphones like vultures waiting for sound bites. The California Department of Corrections issued a statement calling for immediate administrative restructuring. But inside the walls, everyone knew what that meant. Heads were going to roll. In the prison yard, inmates huddled in small circles, watching helicopters hover above. The guards' demeanor had changed, fewer jokes, more tension. A rumor spread that 2 officers had already been suspended, one under federal investigation. The balance of power was shifting and everyone could feel it. Meanwhile, Riley was transferred to a protective wing. Her cell was cleaner, quieter, but emptier. The noise of the yard had been replaced by a different kind of silence, the kind that follows a storm. She spent her days staring at the wall, tracing invisible lines over the cracks. Every sound, a door slam, a distant shout, made her flinch. Late one night, Alvarez returned, this time without backup. He brought her a newspaper. The headline read, "Riley Saunders, the woman who changed San Quentin." She looked at it for a long time before speaking. "They'll come for me," she said quietly. "You know that, right? People don't like it when you make them look in the mirror." Alvarez didn't deny it. "That's why we're moving you," he said. "Witness protection. New name, new start. But you've got to testify first." The silence between them hung heavy. Testifying meant reopening every wound, reliving every moment of humiliation, fear, and betrayal. It meant facing the very people who'd made her life inside a living nightmare. She looked up at him. "If I do this," she said, "you make sure the others get heard too. Not just me. The ones who didn't make it out." By the time the hearings began, the courtroom was filled with tension so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Rows of journalists lined the benches. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Riley sat at the witness stand, her prison uniform exchanged for plain clothes, her tattoos barely visible under a long-sleeved shirt. She looked smaller than anyone remembered, but her voice carried like a blade. She spoke about the night shifts, the unreported injuries, the hush money. About the inmates who vanished after filing complaints. She named names, some high-ranking, some still on active duty. The courtroom went silent after each one. Even Alvarez, who'd seen it all, couldn't hide the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Then came the question everyone dreaded. "Miss Saunders," the prosecutor said, "are you aware of any current staff members still operating under the same system?" Riley hesitated. Her throat tightened. Every instinct told her to stop. But she didn't come this far to flinch now. "Yes," she said finally. "There's one more. The person in charge of the internal reports. The one who approved every cover-up." She turned slowly, and her eyes met Warden Keller's. A low murmur spread across the courtroom. Keller's face stayed frozen, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. 4 years she'd built her reputation as a reformer, the woman who cleaned up San Quentin. Now the truth was unraveling in front of the world. The fallout was swift. Federal investigators raided the prison's administration offices. Documents were seized. Careers ended overnight. Keller was placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. But the story didn't end there. 2 nights later, Riley awoke to the sound of her door unlocking. It wasn't supposed to. Not in protective custody. She rose, heart hammering, the light from the hallway stretching across the floor. A guard stood there, one she didn't recognize. "Transfer order," he muttered. "You're moving tonight." But when she looked closer she saw it, the wrong badge. The wrong uniform patch. Her instincts kicked in. She stepped back. "You're not with them," she whispered. The man smiled faintly, lowering his voice. "Not anymore." He stepped inside, and in that instant Riley knew this wasn't a transfer. It was cleanup. She grabbed the metal chair and swung it just as he lunged. The impact echoed through the corridor. Alarms blared seconds later, lights flashing red and blue. Guards rushed in, finding Riley trembling beside the unconscious intruder. The man's badge, upon inspection, belonged to one of Keller's former security aides, someone under investigation. The message was clear. Even behind bars, the system had a long reach. Weeks later, as the hearings concluded and indictments were issued, Riley was granted early release under protection. But freedom didn't feel like victory. She sat by a motel window one night, staring out at the freeway lights. The world moved on, indifferent to the ghost she carried. A television in the corner replayed her story, the same headlines, the same footage. The woman who changed San Quentin. She turned it off. The silence felt louder than any applause. Alvarez visited once more before she disappeared for good. "You did what most people wouldn't," he said. She looked out the window, a faint blue reflection on her face. "I didn't change the system," she said. "I just showed them where the cracks were." And as he left, she whispered something that never made it into the news reports. "They'll build new walls. But someone else will find a way to break them." The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Plain, unmarked, it slid beneath my office door like a whisper from the past. The postmark was smudged, but the name was unmistakable: Riley Monroe. I hadn't heard that name in nearly a year, not since her quiet release from the Chowchilla Women's Correctional Facility. At first I thought it was a prank. Journalists like me, who dig into the cracks of the prison system, get letters all the time. But this one felt different. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if each stroke carried fear. Inside was a faded photograph. Riley stood in a laundry room, thinner, older, her eyes hollow yet defiant. Behind her was another woman I didn't recognize, holding a mop but staring directly into the camera. Beneath the photo, in shaky blue ink, "She never made it out." The letter itself was short. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Something's happening inside. Don't trust anyone who says they care about reform. They silenced her and I might be next." One final line read, "Find the tape." For days those words haunted me. Find the tape. Riley had been released under California's Early Parole Initiative, a second sunrise, a program promising transparency and rehabilitation. But that sunrise, I was beginning to learn, cast a long dark shadow. I started retracing her steps. Parole records showed she'd been sent to a halfway house near Modesto. The caretaker, a gaunt man with nicotine-stained fingers, squinted at the photo. Yeah, she was here. Quiet girl. Kept to herself. Then one morning she packed up and left. No note, no call. Just gone. But Riley hadn't checked in with parole. No job applications. No records. It was as if she'd been erased. I drove to Chowchilla, the same prison where she'd served her time. The place felt alive with ghosts. The clang of gates, the hum of lights, the eyes of women in blue uniforms that turned away as I passed. The warden greeted me with a polished smile. "Ms. Monroe was a model inmate," he said. "She participated in our programs, mentored others, adjusted well to release." When I mentioned the letter, something flickered behind his expression. "You have to understand," he said, leaning forward, "former inmates sometimes struggle to separate trauma from reality." I left knowing he was lying. The walls of Chowchilla hid more than trauma. They hid truth. Over the next few weeks, I tracked down women who had served with Riley. One, a former nurse named Janelle, agreed to meet in a roadside diner. She looked over her shoulder before speaking. "She found something," Janelle whispered. "In the laundry. Old security tapes, footage showing things the guards didn't want anyone to see." She said she copied one. The next day they threw her in solitary. When she came out, she wasn't the same. Then she disappeared. That was my lead. If the tape existed, it could explain everything. But every file I requested came back redacted. Every contact ghosted me. The deeper I went, the quieter people became. Then, out of nowhere, an anonymous email arrived. Subject line, "You're looking for the wrong tape." Attached was an audio file named rec_0216.wave. It was Riley's voice. Calm, steady, resigned. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it out. They found the footage. They'll say I escaped, but I didn't. They'll bury the truth like they buried her. Check Locker 7B, Modesto Bus Depot." Then came the sound of a door opening, and a man's voice shouting her name before static swallowed everything. 2 hours later, I stood inside the bus station. Locker 7B's lock was broken. Inside was a small envelope containing an SD card. When I played it, a grainy prison hallway appeared. The timestamp, April 17, 2019, 2:14 a.m. Riley pushed a laundry cart down the corridor, glancing back repeatedly. A guard approached, one whose name didn't appear in any official roster. They exchanged something small, metallic. A key. Then the footage cut to another camera, deeper inside the facility. A storage corridor lined with freezers. Riley entered alone. Seconds later, another figure appeared in the doorway. The feed ended abruptly. My blood ran cold. The badge on the guard's chest bore a patch from a private security firm once contracted by the state during an oversight pilot. That company had been dissolved the following year after a misconduct scandal. I called Janelle, number disconnected. I contacted the prison. The warden had retired. The DOC spokesperson stopped replying. 3 nights later, another letter arrived. No return address. Just 6 words across the front, "You were never supposed to find it." Inside was a printed still from the video, Riley in the corridor facing the camera. Behind her, faintly reflected in the freezer door, stood another woman with the same face. It took days to understand. The prison had run a controversial behavioral study where guards impersonated inmates during controlled identity exercises. Officially it was research. In reality, it blurred the line between observation and manipulation. Riley hadn't stumbled onto contraband. She'd uncovered a secret experiment hidden under the banner of rehabilitation, a program that exploited the very people it claimed to help. I encrypted everything, the letters, the audio, the footage, and sent it to ProPublica and The Guardian. Weeks passed while editors vetted the material. Then the story dropped. Inside the program, the hidden lives of inmates under surveillance. The report went viral overnight. Public outrage erupted. Hearings were promised. Families demanded justice. But Riley's name never appeared in the official findings. Her letter, her warning, her courage, all erased again. A month later, one last package arrived. No return address. Inside, a USB drive. The footage opened with rain streaking across a windshield. Riley's voice, quiet but defiant, filled the car. "They think I'm dead. Maybe I am. But as long as someone knows, they don't win." The screen went black. I sat in silence for a long time, her words echoing in the dark. She had exposed a machine built to consume and forget. Her story forced the world to look, if only for a moment. Now, whenever I hear that tape again, I realize truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes, it just makes you harder to silence. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what's next. Hit subscribe, because the next story will take you even deeper, inside the walls where the system hides its darkest secrets.